The greatest general in history, Alexander the Great. He was only 20 years old when he became king. And by the age of 30, he ruled the largest empire the world had ever known. He never lost a single battle. He united Greece, conquered Persia, marched into Egypt, and reached the edges of India. His name became a symbol of power, courage, and destiny. How did one man accomplish in 12 short, brutal years what legions of kings and emperors could not achieve in a lifetime? This is the story of the greatest general in history, Alexander the Great. Alexander was born in 356 BC, in the ancient city of Pella, the capital of Macedonia. Macedonia was a tough, mountainous kingdom on the northern fringe of the Greek world. The sophisticated Athenians to the south often dismissed them as barbarians. But Alexander's father, King Philip II, was no barbarian. He was a ruthless, brilliant military genius who had forged Macedonia into a superpower. He revolutionized warfare, creating the unstoppable Macedonian phalanx, a dense formation of soldiers wielding 18-foot pikes called the sarissa. Philip had used this machine to conquer and unite the bickering Greek city-states under his command. Alexander's mother was Queen Olympias, a princess from the neighboring kingdom of Epirus. She was deeply spiritual, passionate, and fiercely protective. She claimed descent from the mythical hero Achilles and often told Alexander that he was no ordinary child. She whispered to him that his true father was not Philip, but the king of the gods himself, Zeus, who had visited her in the form of a lightning bolt. And young Alexander believed her. From his earliest childhood, he carried within him an unshakable, burning belief that he was destined for greatness. At the age of 12, he proved his potential. A magnificent, but untamable, stallion was brought before his father. It was so wild that no one could mount it. Philip, frustrated, ordered the horse to be taken away. But Alexander stepped forward. He had been watching. He studied the horse carefully, noticed it was terrified of its own shadow, and calmly turned its head toward the sun. He spoke to it softly, stroked its neck, and then, with one fluid motion, he mounted the beast and tamed it. The horse was named Bucephalus, and it would carry Alexander through every great battle of his life. King Philip, watching with tears in his eyes, is said to have declared, "My son, Macedonia is too small for you, seek another kingdom equal to yourself." But Alexander was not just a warrior, he was a thinker. Philip understood that brawn was not enough. He hired the greatest mind of the age, the philosopher Aristotle, to be Alexander's personal teacher. In the quiet groves of Mieza, Aristotle taught the young prince philosophy, ethics, politics, science, and medicine. Alexander devoured knowledge. He learned about the world, about human nature, and about leadership. Most of all, he loved the poetry of Homer, especially the story of the Iliad. He saw the hero Achilles, the warrior who lived for glory, who chose a short, spectacular life over a long, forgotten one, not as a myth, but as a model to follow. He reportedly slept with a copy of the Iliad under his pillow. He wanted his own life to become a legend. When Alexander was only 20 years old, tragedy struck. In 336 BC, his father, King Philip, was assassinated, murdered by his own bodyguard during his daughter's wedding celebration. In a single, bloody night, the young prince became king of Macedonia. Enemies rose everywhere. The moment the news of Philip's death spread, the Greek city-states rebelled, thinking a mere boy could not possibly hold his father's empire together. The Illyrians and Thracians to the north also rose in revolt. They had fatally underestimated him. Alexander moved with a speed that would define his entire career. He first marched his army north, crushing the Illyrians. Then, hearing of a rumor that he himself had been killed, the city of Thebes in central Greece led a full-blown rebellion. Alexander force-marched his army 300 miles south in just 2 weeks. When Thebes defied him, he showed the world the terrible cost of his anger. He destroyed the city completely, razing every building to the ground, killing over 6,000 people, and selling 30,000 more into slavery. He left only one thing standing, the house of the poet Pindar. It was a brutal, terrifying message: Greece would remain united under his command. Rebellion would not be tolerated. Now, with Greece secured, he turned his eyes to his father's unfinished dream, the ultimate prize, the conquest of the mighty Persian Empire. In 334 BC, Alexander led a combined army of 40,000 Macedonians and Greeks across the Hellespont into Asia Minor. As he stepped onto Persian soil, he threw a spear into the ground and declared, "I accept Asia as a gift from the gods." Before marching inland, he made a pilgrimage to the ruins of Troy. There, he made sacrifices at the tomb of his hero, Achilles. The stage was set. His own Iliad had begun. At the Battle of the Granicus River, Alexander's army met the Persians for the first time. The Persians held the high ground on the opposite bank, a seemingly perfect defensive position. Alexander's veteran general, Parmenion, advised him to wait, to cross under the cover of night. Alexander refused. "I will not be stopped by a gutter of a river," he scoffed. He personally led his elite companion cavalry in a reckless charge, straight across the river and up the muddy bank into the heart of the enemy line. It was chaos. Alexander was surrounded, his helmet cleft by an enemy axe. He was moments from death when his friend, Cletus the Black, cut down his attacker, saving his life. Alexander's bravery inspired his men, and terrified his foes. Against overwhelming odds, the Macedonians won a stunning victory. This was more than a battle, it was a statement. The myth of Persian invincibility was broken, but the real challenge lay ahead. The Persian king, Darius III, a man who commanded an empire that stretched from Egypt to India, assembled a massive army to stop the invader. In 333 BC, at the Battle of Issus, the two forces finally met. Darius had over 100,000 men. He had chosen the battlefield, a narrow coastal plain where he believed Alexander's cavalry would be useless. He had trapped the Macedonians. But Alexander saw an opportunity. The narrow field also meant Darius's superior numbers were irrelevant, they couldn't all fight at once. Alexander formed his army. He saw the Persian king, Darius, positioned in the center of his line, surrounded by his best troops. Alexander knew the Persian army was a pyramid, remove the king, and the entire structure would collapse. He gathered his companion cavalry into a wedge and, in a maneuver of pure, audacious genius, led a lightning-fast charge directly at Darius himself. As the Macedonian wedge smashed through the Persian guard, and Darius saw the terrifying, dust-covered face of Alexander charging at him, the Persian king did the one thing he could not, he turned his chariot and fled. The once mighty Persian army, seeing their king abandon them, collapsed. For the first time, the world saw that Alexander was not just a commander, he was a force of nature. After the battle, Alexander captured Darius's family, his mother, wife, and daughters. Instead of treating them as slaves, he treated them with royal courtesy, a gesture of respect that astounded his enemies. After his victory, Alexander marched south along the coast. But the island fortress of Tyre, a key Persian naval base, refused to surrender. They mocked him from their impenetrable walls. Alexander's response was a testament to his unbreakable will. For 7 months, he laid siege, ordering his engineers to build a massive stone causeway, a land bridge, over half a mile long through the open sea to the island. It was one of the greatest engineering feats of the ancient world. When it was complete, his siege towers rolled across, and the city fell. He then marched into Egypt. The Egyptians, tired of Persian rule, welcomed him as a liberator. He was crowned pharaoh and, in a pivotal moment, made a dangerous journey deep into the Libyan desert to the oracle of Siwa. The priests there greeted him as the son of the god Zeus-Amun. When Alexander emerged from the oracle, he was changed. He no longer just believed he was divine, he knew it. At the mouth of the Nile, he founded a new city, Alexandria, which would one day become the greatest center of learning and culture in the world. In Egypt, Alexander wasn't just conquering, he was building a vision of unity, of blending Greek and Eastern cultures, but Persia was not yet finished. Darius, having escaped Issus, gathered one last, enormous army, over 200,000 men, by some estimates, with war elephants and chariots armed with terrifying blades. Alexander's forces were barely half that number. In 331 BC, on the wide, flat plains of Gaugamela, the two armies faced each other for the final reckoning. This was the battlefield Darius had chosen, perfect for his cavalry and chariots. Darius offered Alexander peace, half the empire and his daughter in marriage. Alexander's general, Parmenion, said, "If I were Alexander, I would accept." Alexander famously replied, "So would I, if I were Parmenion." He wanted it all. The battle that followed was his tactical masterpiece. He knew he could be easily outflanked. So, he advanced with his army in an oblique, or angled, formation. He intentionally weakened his own center, tempting the Persians to attack it. As the massive Persian line stretched wider and wider to encircle him, Darius had to pull troops from his own center to prevent being outflanked himself. Alexander was waiting for that exact moment. A small, temporary gap opened in the Persian line. With perfect, split-second timing, Alexander led his cavalry wedge once more, not at the center, but straight through that gap, aiming like a spear at Darius himself. History repeated itself. Once again, the Persian king fled in panic. The Persian Empire, the greatest in the world, was shattered. Alexander was now the master of Asia. He entered Babylon in triumph, but his ambition did not stop there. He pushed eastward, into the unknown lands of Central Asia, modern-day Afghanistan and Uzbekistan. This was a new kind of war, a brutal guerrilla conflict against fierce mountain tribes. Here, he met Roxana, a local princess of extraordinary beauty, and married her, not just for love, but to unite his empire. To Alexander, conquest was not only about war. It was about creating one world. He began adopting Persian customs, wearing Persian dress, and demanding that his men perform proskynesis, the Persian act of bowing before the king. This infuriated his proud Macedonian veterans. They saw their king, their friend, turning into an Eastern despot. This tension exploded in a drunken, tragic night. Cletus the Black, the man who had saved Alexander's life at the Granicus, accused him of betraying his Macedonian roots. In a fit of blind rage, Alexander grabbed a spear and ran his friend through, killing him instantly. His grief was overwhelming. He locked himself in his tent for days, mourning the man he had murdered. The conqueror of the world was at war with himself. In 326 BC, he crossed the Indus River and entered India. He was obsessed with reaching Okeanos, the great outer sea, that he believed encircled the world. There, at the Battle of the Hydaspes, he faced one of his most formidable enemies, King Porus of the Punjab. Porus stood tall and proud, leading an army with 200 war elephants that thundered across the field, animals the Macedonians had never seen in battle. The battle was fierce and bloody, fought in a driving monsoon. Alexander used his tactical genius to outmaneuver Porus, crossing the swollen river upstream during a storm to launch a surprise attack. His disciplined soldiers learned to wound the elephants, driving them back in a panicked stampede through Porus's own lines. Alexander's forces prevailed. After the battle, the captured Porus was brought before him. Impressed by the king's bravery, Alexander asked him how he wished to be treated. Porus, defiant, replied, "Like a king." Alexander smiled and said, "So shall it be." He not only spared Porus but made him an ally, restoring his kingdom. This victory marked the farthest point of Alexander's conquests, the edge of the known world, but his soldiers had reached their limit. They had fought for 8 long years, marching over 11,000 miles through mountains, deserts, and jungles. They were weary, homesick, and terrified of the giant armies and monster men said to lie farther east. At the river Hyphasis, they mutinied. They refused to go any farther. Alexander was heartbroken. He pleaded, he raged, he sulked in his tent for 3 days, trying to shame them into following him. But his men, the men who had bled for him across a continent, would not budge. For the first time, Alexander's will was broken, not by an enemy, but by his own army. He finally relented. He announced they would turn back. The army roared with joy. His dream of conquering the entire world would remain unfinished. The journey home was brutal. He split his army. While part sailed, Alexander led the rest through the nightmarish Gidrosian desert. Thousands died from exhaustion, thirst, and flash floods. Yet Alexander's spirit remained unbroken. He shared every hardship with his men. When scouts found a tiny bit of water and offered it to him in a helmet, he looked at his thousands of thirsty soldiers, and poured the water into the sand. He would not drink while his men went without. In 323 BC, Back in the great city of Babylon, Alexander was planning his next expeditions, to Arabia, to Africa. His mind was still racing toward the next horizon. But destiny had other plans. After a night of celebration, Alexander fell ill with a raging fever. It was not a battle wound that brought him down, but a simple, human sickness, perhaps malaria, typhoid, or poison. For 10 days, his fever raged as his generals and soldiers waited in silent terror. When he could no longer speak, his devoted army, his boys, were allowed to file past his deathbed, one by one. He could only acknowledge them with his eyes. His generals gathered close and asked him the most important question of all: to whom do you leave your empire? He whispered only one word: Kratisti. To the strongest. And with that, the greatest general in history closed his eyes forever. He was just 32 years old. The news of his death spread like fire across the world. His soldiers wept. His empire, built on his singular genius, trembled. And, as he had predicted, it was torn apart by his generals, the strongest, in 50 years of brutal civil war. But his legacy did not die. In only 12 years, he had built an empire stretching from Greece to India, over 5 million square kilometers. But more than land, he had spread ideas. He had carried Greek philosophy, science, art, and language across 3 continents. This blending of East and West created a new era, known as the Hellenistic Age, a period that shaped the world for centuries and laid the groundwork for the Roman Empire. His name became immortal. Generals for all time, from Julius Caesar and Hannibal to Napoleon Bonaparte, all studied his strategies, hoping to match his greatness. Even today, military academies around the world teach his tactics: the combined arms approach, the decisive flank attack, the use of speed and psychology. He was the perfect, terrifying blend of courage, intelligence, and ambition. Alexander once said, "There is nothing impossible to him who will try." And those words became the essence of his life. He tried what no one else dared. He dreamed bigger than any man before or since. He fought not only for power, but for glory, for immortality through action. More than 2,000 years have passed, yet his name still echoes through time. Alexander the Great, the warrior who never lost a battle, the king who became a god, the man who turned his dreams into history. And that is why, to this day, he remains the greatest general in history.